This time, I'd like to talk about how there's often truth hidden behind these rough, general talks. For example, when people talk about how the Chinese economy is doing or how the American economy is doing, these conversations come up regularly in everyday chat. It's said that the Chinese economy is currently in a slump, which is almost universally reported by Japanese media. On the other hand, the American economy is often said to be strong, but this is just a rough understanding. Let's talk about China specifically. Even if the economy is in a slump, it doesn't mean there's no money anywhere for anything. For instance, they're spending money on military development, and since it's a communist country with a planned economy, there's a national strategy that's revised periodically, maybe every few years, dictating which sectors to prioritize. The government then backs investments based on this strategy. Overall, there's a feeling that China's recovery is a long way off, but money does flow into certain sectors. Whether this will lead to success is another matter entirely, similar to the case of the Osaka Expo in Japan, which many say won't succeed but can't be stopped. So, saying that China's economic downturn means there's no need to be wary of their military development isn't accurate. They're investing pinpointedly in certain areas, so letting your guard down might mean China could take the lead in those areas. While acknowledging that the Chinese economy is generally in a slump, it's crucial to delve deeper into how things are going within China. This time, although this is known in Japan, there isn't much specific information about the extent of this. So, I'd like to talk a bit about regional disparities in China. This has been an issue for a long time. Coastal cities lead the economy, while inland areas are said to be left behind in economic development. The numbers China officially releases make this clear. Chinese GDP figures, in particular, are not much discussed by experts, probably because they don't trust them, so discussing based on these numbers is considered meaningless. However, based on the figures China does release, let's look at what kind of disparities exist. In 2022, the GDP per capita in Shanghai was about 190,200 yen, which is roughly 4 million yen in Japanese yen. While Shanghai might be imagined as a place full of rich people, this is the average, including those with billions in personal assets or who buy entire buildings in Japan. This means the average Chinese person might be quite poor, but let's not dwell on that topic now. Instead, let's look at regional disparities. Shanghai is considered the most economically developed area in China, with a per capita GDP of about 4 million yen in 2022. In contrast, in the poor, inland region of Guizhou, considered left behind economically, the per capita GDP was about 55,000 yen, roughly 1 million yen in Japanese yen. That's roughly a quarter of Shanghai's, showing a vast difference even within the same country, affecting labor costs and consumption power differently. From a Chinese perspective, if labor costs rise in your area, one strategy might be to move factories to cheaper regions within China. In Japan, while there are regional wage differences, the benefit of relocating factories isn't as significant. However, in China, these regional differences can be as stark as between countries. Speaking of disparities, the urban-rural divide in China is even more severe. While this is known in Japan, let's look at specific differences. In rural China, educational infrastructure is poor, so Chinese are surprised to see that in Japan, even in areas with many farmers, schools are equipped similarly to those in urban areas. In China, rural schools might still be quite traditional, and for high-level education, one must go to cities where securing good teachers is easier. This leads to lower educational standards in rural areas, affecting university admission rates, fixing disparities based on birthplace. Keep this in mind as it relates to later discussions. In contrast, in Japan, where you're born doesn't determine your fate as decisively. Moreover, rural China lacks not only educational but also medical infrastructure. Many areas don't have proper hospitals, leading to a shortage of doctors, and thus, people in rural areas might not receive adequate treatment if they get sick. Lastly, let's talk about the myth of digital payments and 5G in China. While it's said that everyone in China uses smartphones for payments and that 5G is widespread, in rural areas, internet infrastructure might not even exist, so even with a smartphone, you might not connect to the internet. This means the urban narrative of digital China doesn't apply everywhere. So, when discussing China, much of what's thought as common might only apply to a part of the country. And speaking of disparities, there's also a divide between the rich and the not so rich, but that's a story for another time. Let's move to America next. The American economy is said to be doing very well, but with so much information available and many viewers understanding English, comments on this topic are plentiful. For those living in America, this might be common knowledge, but in Japan, there's a perception that everyone in America lives well. So, Let's discuss regional disparities in America. The term zip code destiny is well known in America. It means that where you're born or live can dictate your life's path. America also has significant regional disparities, though not due to government policy like in China but because of societal structures like how education is funded by local property taxes. Poor areas can't fund good education, leading to a cycle of poverty and limited upward mobility. This zip code destiny is researched in America, confirming this reality. So, the idea of America being a land of prosperity for all is misleading. It's only true for some. For instance, look at the recent drop in 7-Eleven stock price, partly due to the polarization of consumer spending, where middle and lower income groups are becoming more cautious. Even though stock prices have risen under Biden's administration, benefiting those with assets, the reality for middle and lower income groups is challenging, which might explain why Democrats lost to Republicans and why there's high expectation for Trump. In conclusion, while Japanese media often gives a superficial overview of economies, this isn't enough for informed investment decisions. More in-depth information is needed, which can often be found on YouTube, where creators are sometimes experts in their fields. Traditional media often simplifies complex economic situations, potentially misleading those with lower financial literacy into making poor investment choices, which could be likened to gambling, ultimately only benefiting the financial institutions. That's all for today. See you in the next video.